Some people believe respect disappears slowly, that it fades with time, disagreements, or distance. But often, the truth is more unsettling. Respect rarely erodes gradually. More often, it collapses in a single moment, a small behavior, a quiet decision, a subtle shift in how someone treats you. And once that moment happens, something invisible changes between two people. Because respect, unlike affection or familiarity, is fragile. It lives in the silent assumptions people make about who you are. And when those assumptions break, the relationship is never quite the same again. The unsettling part is that many people don't even notice when it happens. They feel a slight shift, a strange change in tone, a subtle difference in how someone speaks to them, but they can't quite name it. Until one day they realize something uncomfortable. They are no longer being treated the same way. Carl Jung once observed that the greatest tragedies of the human psyche often occur quietly, not through dramatic betrayals, but through small, unconscious behaviors that slowly reshape how others perceive us. And among those behaviors, one in particular carries a profound psychological consequence. Because when someone sees this once, they often stop seeing you the same way forever. But to understand why, we first need to look at a strange misunderstanding in modern culture. Today, we talk constantly about confidence, self-respect, and boundaries. Social media is filled with advice about becoming high value, asserting dominance, or never letting others disrespect you. But the deeper psychological reality is more complex. Respect is not commanded, it is perceived. It emerges from subtle signals people unconsciously read about your relationship with yourself, how you handle discomfort, how you carry responsibility, how you react when pressure appears, and perhaps most importantly, how you behave when your dignity is tested. Modern culture often focuses on external status, success, youth, money, visibility. But throughout history, the deepest forms of respect were never built on these things. They were built on inner solidity, the quiet sense that a person cannot easily be bent by pressure, that they possess something stable inside them. Jung described this as psychological integration. A person who has confronted their fears, acknowledged their shadow, and developed an inner center becomes difficult to destabilize, not because they dominate others, but because they are not internally fragmented. People can feel this almost immediately, and they can also feel when it disappears. Which brings us to the moment where respect is often quietly lost. It happens when someone consistently abandons their own dignity to avoid discomfort, not once out of kindness, not once out of compassion, but repeatedly out of fear. The moment someone begins betraying themselves to keep approval, something subtle shifts in the psychological atmosphere. Others may not consciously analyze it, but they feel it, because human beings have an extraordinary sensitivity to authenticity. We can detect when someone stands on solid ground, and we can also sense when that ground is unstable. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote that the most common form of human weakness is the inability to tolerate disapproval. And when someone cannot tolerate disapproval, they slowly begin shaping themselves around other people's reactions. They laugh at things they don't find funny. They agree with things they don't believe. They accept treatment that quietly diminishes them. Each individual moment may seem small, but psychologically, something profound is happening. They are teaching others how much of themselves they are willing to abandon. Respect begins to dissolve not because someone made a mistake, but because they revealed that their identity can be negotiated. And when identity becomes negotiable, the psychological structure holding respect together begins to loosen. Jung understood this dynamic in a deeper way. He believed that every person carries a persona, the social mask we present to the world. The persona helps us function in society. But when someone becomes too dependent on the persona, they begin living almost entirely through the approval of others. Their sense of self becomes externalized. Instead of asking, "Is this aligned with who I am?" they ask, "Will this keep people happy with me?" At first, this seems harmless. In fact, society often rewards it. Agreeable people are liked. Flexible people are welcomed. Accommodating people avoid conflict, but over time, something inside the psyche weakens because the individual slowly stops protecting their inner center. They stop defending their boundaries, they stop expressing their authentic reactions, and the people around them unconsciously begin adjusting their perception. Not necessarily with cruelty, not even intentionally, but quietly, because respect at its core is a recognition of psychological structure. It is the sense that someone possesses an internal axis. When that axis becomes flexible to the point of collapse, others begin interacting differently. They interrupt more, they push further, they ask for more than they once did. And the strange thing is, most people cannot explain why this shift happened, but they feel it. Imagine a quiet scene late at night. A man sits alone in his apartment after a long day at work. He replays a conversation from earlier. His colleague made a dismissive joke about him in front of others. Everyone laughed. He laughed too. But as he sits in the silence of his living room, something inside him feels unsettled. Not angry, not humiliated, just quietly diminished. He senses that something small slipped away in that moment. And he wonders if the others noticed. Often they did, not consciously, but psychologically, because respect is deeply tied to how someone treats themselves in moments of subtle testing. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps, wrote that the final freedom of the human being is the ability to choose their attitude under pressure. When someone consistently chooses self-betrayal in order to maintain comfort, they unknowingly communicate something powerful. My identity is negotiable. And once that signal is sent repeatedly, the psychological contract between people begins to change. But here is the deeper and more uncomfortable truth. The real loss is not the respect of others, it is the erosion of self-respect. And once self-respect weakens, the external world mirrors that internal fracture. Jung believed that the psyche demands integrity. When we act against our deeper sense of self for too long, a quiet internal division appears. Part of us knows the truth, part of us performs the role, and the tension between those parts slowly drains our vitality. This is why many people reach midlife with an uncomfortable feeling they cannot easily name. From the outside, their life may look functional, stable job, social connections, routine days, but inside there is a strange hollowness. A sense that they have slowly negotiated away pieces of themselves over the years, small compromises, unspoken resentments, moments where they stayed silent when something inside them said, "Number." Jung believed that midlife often awakens the psyche to this realization, because the second half of life is not about building a persona. It is about reclaiming the self beneath it, which means learning a difficult psychological skill, the ability to tolerate discomfort in order to remain internally aligned. This does not mean becoming aggressive or confrontational or cold. True dignity is rarely loud. It is simply consistent. It is the quiet refusal to betray oneself for approval. Picture another scene. A woman sits in a hospital waiting room beside an aging parent. The fluorescent lights hum softly. The air smells faintly of disinfectant. As she watches the slow movement of nurses and patients in the hallway, she feels time differently than she did when she was younger. Suddenly, the small social performances of life seem less important. Approval feels lighter. Conflict feels less frightening. Because in the presence of mortality, something becomes clear. A life built entirely around pleasing others slowly becomes unbearable, and this realization often marks the beginning of psychological integration. The moment when someone stops asking, "How do I avoid discomfort?" and begins asking, "What kind of person do I want to be?" Respect, both internal and external, begins rebuilding at that point, not through force, but through alignment. People who possess deep self-respect are not perfect. They sometimes make mistakes. They sometimes misjudge situations. But they rarely abandon themselves to maintain approval. And others can feel this stability. It creates a subtle gravitational pull. People speak to them differently. They listen differently. They hesitate before crossing certain boundaries, not because the person demands respect, but because their identity appears internally anchored. And that is something human beings instinctively recognize. Near the end of life, many people reach a quiet realization. The moments that matter most are rarely the comfortable ones. They are the moments when we acted in alignment with who we truly were, even when it cost something, even when it made others uncomfortable, even when it meant standing alone for a while. Because those moments shape something deeper than reputation. They shape identity. An identity once solidified becomes a source of calm that no external validation can replicate. So, if there is one quiet truth hidden beneath all of this, it may be this: respect is not something you demand from others. It is something you build in the invisible relationship you have with yourself. And the moment you stop betraying that relationship, something subtle changes in how the world sees you. Not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily. Because when a person finally stands on their own psychological ground, others can feel it. And the strange thing is, most of the time, they begin respecting you long before you ever say a word. If this reflection resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And subscribe for more explorations into psychology, meaning, and the deeper patterns that shape the human mind.